John Henry told his captain, Bossman, do you ever pray? Well, if I miss this deal, let this hammer get away. Tomorrow be your burying day. Lord, Lord. Tomorrow be your burying day.
This is En Masse, bringing together stories of struggle and hope from the working class. I'm your host, Liz Medina.
You better listen, my brother, 'cause if you do, you can hear there are voices still calling from across the years.
Dear friends, welcome to the Labor Radio Podcast Network Profile Series highlighting the work of our members. The growing network of over 70 shows in 4 countries serves as a one-stop shop for audiences looking for labor content and as a resource for labor broadcasters, podcasters, and content producers. My name is Evan Papp, and I produce Empathy Media Lab's podcast on labor, political economy, arts, and culture, and we're a proud member of the Labor Radio Podcast Network. Liz Medina from En Masse, very glad to be speaking with you. Could you talk a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, and what led you to organize labor?
Sure, absolutely. So I grew up in Baldwinsville, New York, which is in central New York. If you Google where the Rust Belt is in New York, that community is certainly part of it. And I think being in that kind of environment of deindustrialization, seeing a lot of shops being closed repeatedly around me, and a lot of working class family struggle gave me a critical mindset from the beginning. And of course, I part of the millennial generation, and I graduated from college thinking that was my ticket to this middle class in 2008, in the middle of the financial crisis. And shortly thereafter, Occupy was a response to that ongoing recession. And it was a very politicizing moment for me. And I really got this strong sense of class consciousness, as many others did for the first time, as a result of the events. The idea that there is an elite 1% and the 99% who have shared interest in shared material conditions. And so I decided to study political economy and become more involved in the labor movement and advocating for working families. And I've always considered myself a working class person, and I'm the first person in my family to go to college. So that's pretty much part of my milieu as well. So I would say that's the short answer of how I became involved, is just experiencing these really eye-opening historical and economic events.
So you mentioned you're surrounded by what was formerly an industrial area and now one of the Rust Belt along the Great Lakes. I'm born in Cleveland, grew up in Michigan, lived a bit in Chicago. And can you talk about what was the industry before it got hollowed out?
Yeah, we had a mix of industries in central New York. We had steel, we had machine manufacturers, and we had the canals as well, and transportation. So the steel obviously is highly automated and very much closed. I think Crucible Steel still operates around Syracuse, but there's probably only a dozen or so people that work there. We do have some military industrial activity that is keeping the area somewhat alive. We have Lockheed Martin in Syracuse area, which is probably one of the larger employers that pays its workers decently. But of course, unfortunately, they are creating weapons of mass destruction and creating war and things that are not helpful to our society. We also had a lot of chemical corporations who have left their mark. Lake Onondaga is, I think, one of the most polluted freshwater bodies in the United States, if not even further. And that's the result of years and years of industrial pollution and dumping right into that lake. So industry has left a devastating impact on that community. If you just drive around through Syracuse, you can actually smell the lake. They're working on capping it right now, but yeah, it's scarred the land, and there's not a lot of opportunity left. I think one of the probably biggest employers are service sector now. Like in most places, we have a failing mall, Destiny USA, that promised to bring a lot of jobs to that area. Obviously, those jobs are not very sustainable, and they're very low paid. So that's the environment that I was immersed in growing up.
So for those who may not be interested or aware of labor news, why do you think unions and organized labor are important and should be covered?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think these days, a lot of people aren't familiar with labor unions at all because so little of our workforce, particularly in the private sector, are unionized. And so most working people don't have an experience of what organized labor can do. And of course, whenever organized labor has become corrupt or done something wrong, that's what is publicized and spread throughout our media environment, versus all the things that we've gained over the years from organized labor. And I think just studying more of the history myself personally has really shown me why unions and organized labor are so important. I don't think it's a mistake that most of us don't learn that a lot of the comforts and privileges that we enjoy today are the result of organized labor, of working people coming together and demanding better lives for themselves. Things such as the 8-hour the day, the weekend, a lot of the workplace safety protections. And as a socialist interested in creating a society that puts people over profits, I think labor and working people have the power to actually make that change, because we are the ones who create the world around us. We are the ones producing the goods and services. So we have immense power. We do the work, and we can make the world differently if we coordinate and organize ourselves to do so.
Absolutely. And if we're helping to grow the food, and we should be able to enjoy the fruits of the labor as well, and not let it all go to someone else.
Absolutely.
Could you talk about your show En Masse and why you wanted to start it and what it's about?
Absolutely. So the show En Masse came about as a way to showcase an oral history project I had done in my own community in Central Vermont, where I live now. And I was looking for a way to share some of the amazing life histories and work histories of the people I interviewed. And the whole reason I got into oral history, particularly oral history of working people's lives, was to expand our understanding of the everyday struggles people are facing and the aspirations of everyday people as well. My background is in actually fine arts, visual arts, painting and drawing. So I'd always been interested in having deep conversations with people in a way, but I was finding myself to be very frustrated with the insularity and, frankly, elitism of the art world that I was seeing. Now, of course, there's many exceptions, but that was my feeling. And so I decided to totally reinvent my practice. And I was really inspired by one of my friends who's a journalist, and he told me about the work of Studs Terkel and working. And after having read those oral histories, I was just so excited, because our lives are so multidimensional and touch upon so many issues and connect us to one another and create a sense of common struggle, even if we have a lot of unique differences about ourselves as well. So En Masse is a way of bringing these oral histories together, of talking about issues broadly outside of the context of a specific campaign or anything else, and creating some kind of unity, creating some kind of class consciousness and shared experiences around class, because I think our society really atomizes people as a way to disempower us, and trying to bring together our stories in a way en masse to show that a lot of our personal struggles are indeed shared and part of a larger structure in our society of a capitalist political economy, of a certain way of doing things, can show that, we have a shared interest in making things different, and we can bring ourselves together to do that. And that's, I know, very ambitious and very broad. That is what I'm trying to do with the show. And that's why I'm having people perform others' stories as part of season 1 of En Masse, to give narrators an opportunity to relate to other people's stories.
And I like that in your show note description, it's also about struggle and hope, and the idea that there have been so many setbacks, but there's also been victories, and hope is a very important part of the struggle, that things can be better, and being able to bridge the struggle with other, if you feel you're suffering, other people have suffered before, and that is a bridge that connects us all.
Absolutely. And I think that hope in everyday lives is so inspirational for me personally, because most of us don't feel like, we are all powerful, we are going to be the next leader of some movement, the next Mother Jones or anything like that. We just, it gives inspiration and hope to regular people such as myself, looking at these stories and how they have faced immense challenges, been aware of what the reality is, and having that knowledge and knowing what the problems are, and oftentimes coming together to resolve that. In the case of the Barre granite workers, which are explored in season 1, a lot of them in the early 20th century were dying in the 30s and 40s because of the dangers of the granite manufacturing process, the silica dust that was produced and cutting up their lungs. And they knew that they had to come together to solve this problem. Otherwise, their communities would be devastated for years to come. Families would be broken, and they would continue to lose their fathers and their brothers and their, the people they loved. And so they came together, they staged multiple strikes, they unionized, and eventually by the 40s, they did get the ventilation systems and safety equipment they needed. That drastically improved their lives and meant that work was no longer this life sacrifice per se, and that, they could be with their loved ones and community, as long as they should be. And yeah, it's huge.
And that victory also was helping future people who had to work in such conditions. And so that victory, there is that linear connection between generations. And yeah, very, very beautiful. And your program, your En Masse, is very high production quality. And could you talk just how you learned about this and how you got into it? Because there's a lot of people who are interested in doing podcasts, and I think you have one of those that people should hear, because there's just a lot going on with the soundscapes and a lot of beautiful spacing and things like that. So
thank you so much for saying that. It was a lot of work, and yet at the same time, what's so wonderful about podcasting and oral history for that matter, is that both of these methodologies and mediums are very accessible, and it just takes patience and time to really learn how to do it. So I used an open source program. I don't have a lot of means, and I used Audacity, probably like most podcasters. It's pretty intuitive and simple to use, and like most people of my generation and younger, I learned things from YouTubing my problems and finding the answers from other people. And I also had the privilege of working in partnership with a local community radio station, WGDR, which is part of Goddard College, for whom I work as a staff person, as a student life coordinator. And there are people who work for WGDR who sometimes give classes on how to use Audacity during our residencies, during our, degree program residencies. We have a low residency model at Goddard, but anyway, that's another story. So I was able to, take a class about how Audacity worked, and also Google a lot of that and really find the way how to make this work. And so I also had access to the amazing mics and production studio set up in WGDR to make season 1. So I didn't have to buy all that fancy equipment. And now I'm kind of off on my own because the pandemic has meant that that station is not open to pretty much anybody. They're just, just the few personnel are allowed in that community radio station. So I'm having to adapt my practice again to try to produce something of high quality with even less means, using my smartphone and trying my best to make up for the reduced audio quality in Audacity, which isn't that challenging to do. It is possible. And also, there's just amazing resources online to add sound effects and music that are under Creative Commons licenses. Of course, you have to pay attention to what each license means and how you can use it as a result. But I was able to go to the Free Music Archive and find a lot of amazing musical pieces that I was able to use under Creative Commons attribution licenses. And I found this wonderful site called freesound.org, which is a whole community of people who like to do field recordings and, collect sounds and sometimes share those under Creative Commons licenses, which is just a wonderful resource. And I myself did field recordings too. I was privileged to be invited to one of the granite manufacturers in Barre, Global Values, and go inside this manufacturing place and get some actual real sounds from the manufacturing process. So it's a lot of time and effort to weave all that together and learn everything and source everything and feel which pieces of music work and which sounds work and how to create dramatic pauses. And I'm sure it's not a perfect formula that I've come upon, but if you have the patience and time, anyone can pull something really of high quality together.
Beautiful. And you don't necessarily need a big background in sound engineering, and don't need a whole lot of resources. But if you're passionate and you are willing to put the time in, you can produce something beautiful like En Masse. So, as a member of the Labor Radio Podcast Network, could you talk about why you think this network is important, and also just how you came about it, how you heard about it, because it's continually growing, and there may be other people who will hear this and want to join.
Absolutely. I'm so excited this network exists, and wow, what a serendipitous moment when I stumbled upon it. So I had finished producing all of season 1 already, and I was looking for my group of people who would be excited about this and are doing similar work. So I felt less alone in what I was doing. And I had already been listening to some podcasts that are part of this network or that joined this network very early on, such as Working Class History and the Working Life podcast with Jonathan Ticini. And I just became interested in the whole idea of podcast networks. So I was doing some research about what podcast networks were out there. And I looked at each show that I regularly listened to and looked for what network they may belong to, if any. And I saw that these 2 shows were members of the Labor Radio Network. And I said, that sounds like the exact kind of network that would be suitable for me. I looked at other networks, and a lot of them seemed kind of exclusive and, they didn't necessarily, it was more about storytelling for the sake of storytelling versus a shared passion and interest in working people's lives. So I looked at these other networks and I'm like, I don't think I'd first of all get in because they have really high barriers to entry, and it is more of an advertising marketing machine type of network. And also I don't think they really care about labor and working issues. Not many media networks, frankly, do, unfortunately. And that's why the Labor Radio Network is so revolutionary and important. And so I saw the Labor Radio Network on these two shows. I Googled the Labor Radio Network. I saw there's a little button on the website for the Labor Radio Network that said, add your show here. I was like, wow, they seem to have a really open door to people who are interested in this. And I sent the network an email. I said, hey, I have this podcast that's focused on working people's lives. And, you know, I'm a labor activist myself. I care about working people and these issues. I would love to join your network. And pretty quickly, I think this was like in May, I received a welcome with open arms from Chris and Harold, who have really started this network and put so much effort into it and have done incredible work. And I've, been so enamored with this community ever since, and I'm so excited to see how this network grows.
Yeah, and that's how I came across your work as well. I joined in June, and I'm just always inspired and humbled by the amazing people and the amazing content being produced. So in closing, looking into the future of organized labor, where do you see opportunity and hope?
That is a really good question. I can't claim to necessarily have the answer, but I think as a labor organizer, seeing the terrain and how much the standard organizing process going through the National Labor Board, having elections through the National Labor Board, has really been corrupted in a way that makes it very difficult for working people to organize, even if the majority of workers in the workplace want to. And so I actually see the future of organized labor working around these decaying compromise systems of the National Labor Board and these rules and regulations. I see a lot of hope in labor organizations that take creative new approaches. I think in my own community in Vermont, I'm really inspired by migrant justice and how they've been able to win worker protections by organizing their workers and putting pressure on the supply chain. So they don't even necessarily have a single direct employer to whom they can air their grievances and ask for redress, but they do have certain people such as Ben & Jerry's and Hannaford's that carry a lot of the dairy products that they produce. And so they've been able to organize through rallies, protests, and other demonstrations and allyship with other organizations in the community to win contracts for their dairy workers who do not have any of the really protections of the National Labor Relations Act and other labor laws, because a lot of them are undocumented and they're working in agriculture, which is oftentimes has a loophole for organization as well. And I don't claim to be an expert on labor law or anything like that, but I see how this organization in particular has successfully organized and improved the lives of its workers despite the many limitations that they face because of who they are and the state of labor law in our country. And so I think also in terms of other workers as well, trying to really petition employers to recognize their union before even going to through the National Labor Relations Board, because that going through this whole drawn out process that the National Labor Relations Board has set up creates too much of an opportunity for managers to propagandize and try to instill fear on their workers and disenfranchise them from coming together. There's, as you know, so many anti-labor consultants out there that have unfortunately been very successful in workplaces. So I think, really coming together in a more direct action approach to organized workplaces is probably going to be successful. And I think, frankly, as labor law continues to fail American workers, we're going to have to, go back to the old ways of organizing and getting our needs met. And sometimes that means strikes and general strikes sometimes is necessary. This is the environment that unfortunately we're in. We're in unprecedented times where employers in the business class and the ruling class are not afraid to take really egregious illegal actions to protect their narrow interests against the interest of everybody else. So we have to be prepared to respond in really powerful ways.
You better listen, my brother, 'cause if you do, you can hear there are voices still calling from across the years. And they're crying across the ocean, they're crying across the land, and they will until we all come to understand. None of us are free, none of us are free, none of us are free, and one of us is chained. None of us are free, 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 and one of us is chained. None of us are free. There are people in darkness, they just can't see the light. If we don't say it's wrong, then that says